Perfect. Oh,
Hello and welcome to the Goddess Life podcast. I'm Cherise and I'm so excited to introduce our guest for today. This is Ylva from the Cunning Apothecary. You can find Ylva on Instagram and via the website Cunning Apothecary. And Ylva is a traditional witch, teacher, writer, energy healer, and acupuncturist based in Seattle, Washington. And she's the founder of Cunning Apothecary, like I mentioned, and is dedicated to the preservation and sustained practice of the traditional magic and medicine teachings she has been gifted. And I'm so excited to have you here so you can share all of your awesome witchy, herbal, folk healing awesomeness. So welcome. Yay! All right, so I guess this is the question I always ask everybody before we get into it. Tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of your spiritual path, and kind of like where folk healing and herbs and everything kind of came into it.
sure. I always, when I hear that question, I always think, oh, where do I start? So I think I'll start sort of with childhood. I grew up in a mixed cultural home. My mom was from Pennsylvania. Her family are immigrants from Europe. They're Moravi. And I also had a Polish father who immigrated from Poland. And both sides of my family were very devoutly Catholic. So I grew up in a really richly devoted spiritual household. And I learned a lot about devotion through that experience. My grandmother prayed 6 times a day. Which was really cool. So I grew up with a sense of spirit. And then I just started studying different traditions and different ways of being with spirit and discovered magic and witchcraft and herbs. Herbs came later, but it was part of the initial interest that broke me from the Catholic Church and Christianity as a spiritual practice and into more earth-based and pagan traditions. I started energy healing when I was 15, specifically. I found a teacher and was apprenticed to her for about 19 years, Jackie McCloskey. She recently passed away, a year in January. And I learned a lot about being in devotion as an act of service for other folks, and learned a lot about hands-on healing, crystals, prayer, laughter, energy clearing, energy healing from her. And then that just sort of tumbled into a young adult experience of activism, social work, and just, finding my way.
I love it. It's so interesting to me how many spiritual and witchy, particularly witchy individuals have a Catholic background. I myself, my mom's side of the family was Catholic. I mean, my grandma had mass at her house before, so it's really interesting to me how many, people who identify as witches come from that sort of background, which there is a lot of, it seems, a lot of negativity associated with the Catholic and Christian religions. But there really is a lot of beauty with it too. Like you said, the devotion and having that spiritual connection and stuff. And then just kind of, you learn to make it your own and expand all of that.
Yeah, one of the things that I teach about in my classes is that magic is it's a faithless devotion. It belongs to no faith because it's present in all faiths. And it helps us to remember ourselves. Magic is a remembering thing. It remembers us, and it calls us into remembering where we are, how we are, who we are. And I feel like no matter where someone finds their magic in the world, so long as they enter into an honest relationship with it, go for it. So long as it's not impeding or causing suffering in self or other folks. And I feel like that's true also, maybe we'll talk about this, and this is quite a jump, but I feel like that's true also in the trend of witchcraft now, where, part of it is wanting to be sure that the younger generations and people new to the craft have rooted resources for themselves to explore and discover.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like if Google births a witch, that's amazing. And part of what we do at the Cunning Crow, and part of what I do with the School of Traditional Magic here in Seattle, Seattle Witch School, is try to provide a resource for individuals to have access to multiple traditions, points of views, perspectives, so that they can ground themselves in this, in the curiosity, in the discovery, as they're called, because so many people are, I think, hungry for what magic offers them. And I agree. I think there is a lot to be said about the constraints implied
Mm-hmm.
through organized religions, and at the same time, magic exists there. And so,
Mm-hmm.
I have Lutheran pastors in my circles. I have atheists in my circles. It's
I love
wild.
that.
Yeah.
I love that it seems everybody, well, not everybody, but so many people are going back to, I mean, quite literally roots with herbs and everything, but going back to, to the base of it. I mean, the base of every religion really is connection to spirit. And so I think that's beautiful. That's awesome that you have Lutherans and people of all different religions, learning from you. I think it's really important. I think that, people, they like being a witch. You can be a Catholic witch. You can be a Lutheran witch. You can be a Jewish witch. You can be, no denomination. You can just be a witch. It's more, what you do with it. And I think that's really awesome. So yay. So why do you think, this kind of really leads into my next question. So why do you think like magic and witchcraft and folk healing and stuff is really kind of becoming so prevalent now? Like, why do you feel so many people seem to be more drawn to it now than maybe even ever before?
I honestly think there's a lot of reasons for that. And over 23 years of studying the craft personally, I've noticed moments in time along that journey where magic was more popular than not. And I do agree that nowadays it seems as though magic is a thing to turn to. It's an option for people, and it's not as fringe as it had been. It's not as fringe or as taboo. I think that there's a lot of reasons perhaps why people are called to magic, and I wonder that one of the reasons is a hunger for the ability to, I'll say it this way, the ability to take control in very erratic times. And we do live in increasingly volatile times, especially in the United States, and particularly if you are of a marginalized identity. Those of us who exist within marginalized identities have known this for a while, and now so many other people are really coming into the conversation, which is amazing. And I think magic offers a very personal connection to power, and it gives us something to do. It gives us resources to, I think, create fields of safety so we don't feel so alone. I think that at the heart of it, people are needing direction, purpose, support, safety, and an identity. There's a lot of benefit to neo spirituality and spiritualisms. And one of the benefits to the past generations of spiritual growth and development and discovery is that we now have access to so many different ways of being with spirit. What's needing to happen, and I think this is also why magic is such a popular, I don't want to say trend, but expression of faith or devotion or spirituality, is that we are needing to take more accountability for our spirituality. We're also needing to take more accountability for our influence and impact on the world. And magic requires us to be responsible and requires us to be accountable. Magic is also inherently political. and it's a radical act. And I think, given all of those threads, magic is the perfect weaving. Magic also offers, I'll say us as white people, and those of us who are white people in your viewing audience, it gives us an accountable foundation and threshold for our own spirituality, that we can start decolonizing our faiths, and we can start to make reparations through accountable means to those that we have colonized. And it also gives us a rooted access to apply our spirituality, so we can not appropriate other faiths and other traditions and other cultures without permissions.
Those are excellent insights into all of that. I love that I'm seeing more of because you keep talking about, activism, and I mean, I don't know if you use that exact word, but that is becoming such a big thing. I feel like for a while it was like there were activists and people doing, standing up for people and doing things, and then there were spiritual people, and it was like there was sort of this disconnect. And I love that it seems, more and more those two things are coming together, and that, that now more than ever, it's so important to have spirituality into our lives, whatever that looks like for each of us, because it gives us that, when you do have that spiritual connection, you're wanting to then help other people. You're wanting to empower yourself to then empower others and to help others. And so it's just this kind of like awesome domino effect. Like you said, like kind of weaving and building off of each other. And magic is so much more than just, lighting a candle and burning some incense. Like it's so much more of a spiritual, personal thing. And I think it's really awesome. This was not on my list of, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, to kind of piggyback on what you just said, and I want to add and expand that magic is more than just lighting a candle and burning incense, and also magic can be just lighting a candle and burning incense, so long as the intention, so long as the relationships are brought to that experience. So what have you done to cultivate a relationship of faith, a relationship of devotion, a relationship of accountable power, and bringing those efforts to the candle, light the candle, bringing those efforts to the incense, light the incense. One of the things I think is that there's no real wrong or right way to practice faith or devotion, particularly in the craft. I think that there are personal value systems that must be cultivated. And that guides the witch. Magic has no affinity except for what exists inside of us. And so we have to come to terms with what's inside of us. That's what we bring to the candle. That's what we bring to the incense. And that's what we bring to our work as witches. So I wanted to just ping that, because it's a point of conversation I have with my students often, which is that you don't need a lot to practice as a witch. You don't need 20, 30 years of experience, but what you do, an accountability to your relationships, the relationship with yourself, circumstances, and there of course are rituals and ceremonies that you do want to take time and cultivate and make sure you have a relationship with the symbols and the process. I'm not saying that there's never a time for bringing more to the conversation or bringing more to the table, but magic is such a wild and instinctual practice, and we're animals, like we do know what to do in a moment. We may experience a new or a moment or a first moment, and the instinct rises and we figure it out, but over time that practice becomes more accessible, I think.
Thank you for shedding light on that, because it is like you said, it's our intention and it's what comes from inside that matters. I mean, you don't necessarily even have to have any sort of tools. It just, you yourself are magic, and you yourself, your thoughts, your words, your feelings create magic.
There's a saying in the Romani I don't want to say tradition, but the Romani culture that we borrow the earth. And when I think about that, I think, when I look out into the world, I'm looking out the windows now and I see trees changing colors, and I see buildings, and I see the sky is open, and I see reds in the trees and greens and birds and cars, and I think, well, that's the earth, that's the world. Yeah, I live in a city, and we've synthesized our environment, but it's still contemporarily natural. It's our world. We borrow that. And so when I think, oh, we borrow the earth, I feel like, oh, everything outside of me is also accessible inside of me. And so I agree with you 100%. We really just need to show up.
Yeah. Intention is everything.
Yeah.
I do want to ask, because I've had this conversation with other witches, and just people, spiritual people in general. What are your thoughts on the quote unquote Instagram witch, or the people that are taking spirituality and witchcraft and kind of just using it as, to post a pretty picture or to just be trendy and, oh, look at me, I'm dressing like a witch, or, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I'll be really honest and say I follow a few trendy Instagram witches for style input because they have such a good eye, I think, oh, well, let me see what you think I should look like, right? Which is wearing these days. They're cute. It's cute. And I say that in a very sweet and endearing way. I think a lot of things about it. And what I think I want to say is that there's always trends. That where there's power, there will be, where there is radical disruption in culture, there will be waves that follow. And I think one of the things that I see in a positive light to trendy witches or Instagram witches is that they have caught the wake of a powerful disruption in our culture. And witches are leading that disruption. We are leading that disruption. And I think anyone who can tap into that and access that is going to bring more stability ultimately, and more influence ultimately, to what's needing to happen in the disruption of the hierarchical systems of oppression. That being said, anyone who is interested in accessing their own magic and learning the identity of witch for themselves is likely going to turn to the people who are most accessible, which will be the people following trends and leading trends that are influenced by this disruption in power. And I'm on the fence about it. I think when I was 12 years old, I lived in a small swamp town, and what I had access to in the library was a book on the Salem murders of witches and a discourse on Buddhism. These were the two books I had to learn about what I would imagine would be religious discourse. And from there, I just kind of followed trends. I just followed where I could access. And in that, my first tarot deck came from Walden's bookstore in the mall.
Mine came from Spencer's.
Yeah, and so if I sat here and critiqued folks who were inspired by magic and wanted to learn more, and I critiqued them for following trends, it would be a cruelty to myself and the youth inside of me, right? It would be offensive, and it would be inappropriate, because so long as someone is taking responsible action for their curiosities, that's great. Where I have an issue or where I'm concerned is when people stop at the surface and they don't explore, penetrate deeper to find meaning or resource outside of what is popular. For instance, this trend of cursing people left and right as a form of disruption. I'm not saying don't, I'm not saying do, but what I am saying is, do you know what you're doing? Actually know what you're doing? Have you consulted somebody who has the experience of working in these ways to understand the implications? There are other ways to deconstruct oppressive systems of power. There are other more expansive ways, more deeply penetrating ways. And there are also times and circumstances that are more appropriate for certain actions than others. And that's that's what's not being communicated in the trends. And people, I feel, can get lost in a superficial lens and lose the deeper meaning or intention, and perhaps miss the connections with themselves if they don't allow an opportunity to see past that. But I don't know, hell, we start somewhere.
Yeah.
And if Instagram gives birth to a witch, that's rad, you know, like, do it, you know, get that.
That's kind of how I feel about it. I mean, yeah, I can't be judgmental. Like I said, I got my first tarot deck when I was 13 from Spencer's. Like, had I not gotten that deck from Spencer's, I might not have found, you know, my connection to something else. So I think I have the similar views as you. You know, it's kind of, it's being talked about. It's being more in the mainstream, so more people will be interested in it. You know, if more people see this on Instagram, they may be more likely to go to the library and check out a book and look into it. So it's good on that end. It's just, I think, like you as well, where I kind of, I don't even want to say where, I guess maybe where it bothers me is where it's the superficial, and because it's something that I hold so dear to me, and I know the profound, you know, effect that spirituality and witchcraft has had on me. So it's almost like it's something sacred to me. So then when I see people just like doing it because, you know, they think they're cute and it's cool, I'm like, no, like, it's sacred. But you know,
isn't that why we do what we're doing, right? Isn't that why we do what we're doing? You have your podcast and your whole internet community and your own in-person community in order to provide resources for people to begin to access those deeper levels. Same here with the Cunning Crow, same with Witch School. This is why we're doing what we're doing, because we know that people are hungry, and we know that it's necessary to have safer spaces for people to learn and to discover. So, you know, I think it's part of a process, and you know, there's a lot happening. There's a lot happening in our worlds, and to be quite honest, we need more witches. We need more people who are bold in their expression of self. And we do need, in addition to that, we need this boldness to be, I keep using the word responsible, but I mean it. We do need these expressions of boldness to be accountable, to be responsible, not just in terms of responsible action and like withholding, but like be accountable to our times. What's happening now? We need to be accountable to that. We need to be, we have to take responsibility for this. What's been laid before us. These cards have been played. So how are we going to interact with them? Well, we're going to interact with them through magic, through witchcraft, through prayer, through radical disruption, right? And so we provide safer spaces for people to understand that that's what's happening inside of them. You know, a lot of energy can be put into a facade, but that's an identity. That's a persona. We need persona. We need identity. Otherwise, who shows up? How do we stand? And so let's wait it out and see. That's what I kind of keep coming back to. Is like, all right, all these witches are learning their identity. That's amazing. And let's keep going. Let's keep going, and let's create space for them. Because once they know who and how they are, then we will provide them places to stand. And that's amazing. So, but I do agree with you. What bothers me is that this is sacred, and they've dedicated an entire life to it. And you know, I don't know, but Instagram is the new library. You know, Amazon is the new Walden and Spencer's. You know? Who knows? Maybe there's something bigger happening in that and that we don't really know about. So
that's very true. Excellent points. So I kind of want to go back to like folk healing and herbs, and like what role do you think that those play in a person's spiritual path? Or maybe even kind of what role did folk healing and herbs play in your own spiritual path?
you know, I have a medical degree. I have a bachelor's degree in social work, and I have a master's of science in East Asian medicine. And that master's degree was founded in medical science. I want to put that out there because the witch, for me, has always been scientist. And we try things out and we try things on, and we discover, how else would we have discovered how to take henbane and aconite and all of these other more toxic herbs, and if we hadn't explored and experimented through trial and error and what we would now, I think, call the scientific method. So I want to just put that as a foundation, because folk practice isn't entirely without it's an evidence-based practice, right? And I think when we enter into a relationship with folk healing or traditional practices of medicine, like herbalism or energy work, prayer, chanting, dancing, singing, meditation, it connects us back to an instinctual science, I think. I'm exploring this thought in this moment. So what role does that play? Well, I think it offers us an opportunity to trust ourselves. And I believe that when we trust ourselves, we are more able to honestly, or at least earnestly, show up to our relationships in life. And so for me, the exploration of traditional healing, when I was 15 and I started my apprenticeship with Jackie Fauski, I was fighting substance addiction. I was severely depressed, very anxious. I was 15 years old, you know, and there's a history there that I'm not going to talk about. But what I'll say is that at 15 years old, I was a multiple abuse survivor, and not just external abuse, but internal. And when I started studying, my dog is being cute. When I started studying, with Jackie, I found worth in myself. You know, at that time, I thought I was losing my mind, and I might have actually had a lot more going on than I necessarily knew how to deal with emotionally. But the traditional practices of hands-on healing and crystal working and prayer and exorcism at the time, and curse unraveling at the time, tarot cards, past life regression, all of that helped me to put word to what I was experiencing in myself instinctually. And it helped me first as a foundation to discover value and restore esteem. It helped me to identify a place for myself. And I just built from there. And I think when people come to me for witching work, it's a mixed bag. Sometimes people come as a default first response. It's like, oh, I have a cold. I'm going to come to the herbalist and the witch. I want to see, one, is there any energy that needs to be cleared? Two, maybe it's just a flu bug. You know, three, maybe get some acupuncture and help my immune system. Some people come and it's a last resort. They've literally tried everything. And no matter if it's a first response or a last resort, magic works. It might take a few sessions. It might take some trial and error, but it is a form of science. And I think it helps give people permission to explore their own circumstances, right?
Yeah.
Like, there isn't a quick fix. There are preferred methods, and they may or may not work, but there are options. And helping people to understand that they have a sovereign governance of their experience, whether it's a cold and how to treat it, or whether it's anxiety, depression, whether they are needing support and tutelage around psychic development. There are options. And so I think that's something it does provide people. And it gives them a good foundation to build from once they can identify. So many students, you know, the first few weeks of my witch school, my first year of witch school, which meets weekly, a lot of the conversation looks like, wow, I never thought there were other people like me. I always thought I was absolutely off the wall. I never realized that there's actually words for what I'm experiencing. You know, once they learn magic, what it is, once they learn witch or other ways to name it, you know, they begin to put context to their experiences, and I think that helps settle them, helps bring a lot of that power, a lot of that influence into meaningful, directive energy. It's juicy all of a sudden. It becomes more vital and more viable. You know, it's weird to say that abuse can be a viable option. No, that's what I mean to say. Like our history of abuse, the energy in that can be made use of. It's weird to say that to people. It's weird to feel that inside. But abuse is never a viable option. But,
yeah, I knew where you're going with it.
but we literally can, when we're ready, when we are able, when the circumstances are right, we can bring that energy forward and put it to use. Some of my more advanced students say, what should I do if I get angry at the circumstances my client is going through, or I get sad about it? And I will facilitate ceremonies in class for individuals. I will demonstrate the techniques. And more often than not, I'm crying in the middle of the ceremony with my client. I say, make use of it. It's there. Why would you hide that? You don't make it about yourself. You know, the past is the past. And if it's still present, it needs healing. Right? And so magic brings that forward. So if my abuses in the past, the ways I was abused, if those come forward and they are present and they are real, they are still in need of tenderness. I can make use of them to a certain degree. But then outside of that, I need to bring them to someone. I need to bring them to faith. I need to bring them to healing. Anyhow, I kind of went on a tangent.
That's okay. I love it. I love it. You have all kinds of wisdom. I love it. It seems kind of like, you know, I mean, obviously folk healing, spirituality go hand in hand, but just kind of like with spirituality, when you're doing any sort of folk healing or energy healing, you know, there is that accountability. Like you said, there's that keeping it, you know, you have to be accountable for it. And it's not a quick fix. It's, you know, when you start learning about energy healing and, you know, alternative, even though they were the original methods of healing, you know, it forces you to kind of go within and, like you said, to use the cards you've been dealt, even the not so great ones. And you end up coming out a stronger individual after that, you know.
So you pray that you can.
I'm sorry?
You pray that you can come through that in a way that is more meaningful. For me personally, a personal note, when I transitioned publicly as being a transgendered woman, it came at great expense. And part of what I experienced in the process of watching my world
Oh no,
this
you.
experience.
Oh. Can you go back to what you just said? Yeah, the internet just kind of tried to go out a second. You said reconfigure, and that was the last I heard.
When my life was reconfiguring, when I was reconfiguring my life and my life was responding, I thought so many people would say to me, oh, this is going to make you stronger. This is going to make you be, oh my God, you should be so emboldened and so happy. And I wasn't. I was miserable. I was frightened. And coming through that wave, through faith. I mean, I had my faith, I had my devotion, but that was also rocked, to be quite honest. You know, circumstances of change and conflict will disrupt faith, and I think that that is important. It is essential for us to have crises in faith, and it's essential that when we are going through deep and meaningful circumstances, that we do not deny the reality of our experience. And that might be disappointment, and that might be fear, and that might be loneliness, and it might be vulnerability, and it might be weakness. So what I'm saying is that there's a prayer that...
Oh no, you froze again. Uh-oh. You froze again.
You got me?
There you are. You're back.
Okay. What I do think is that coming through that experience, there is an inner strength that I maybe don't realize yet the full potential of. What I do feel more related to is the softness, the vulnerability. So I come through this situation more vulnerable. And maybe that's strength, I'm not sure. And I'm very particular about words, and you may kind of have got a sense of that through our conversation. Part of the reason I'm so particular about words is they carry power, and they are the craft, they are magic. You know, in the Polish and the Slavic traditions, when you make healing, you put the healing in your mouth, and you give it word, and then you put the word to people, you put the word on people, and the word carries the energy of the healing, and that's what begins to work them. And so for those who are watching, like, yeah, magic is transformative, and that's not always easy. It's not always pleasant, and it's not always hard either, right? That's the thing. You don't have to work as hard sometimes for certain things. Maybe and that's awesome. But at the same time, you're going to come back out of it changed. And I make mention of that to people. This will change you, and we don't know how. So sometimes people come out really resilient and super empowered and shiny. And some people come out realizing that there is different work to do. Different work. There is emotional work to do, there's physical work to do, and it's not just spiritual work. And so where they come out of it realizing that the world isn't what they thought it was, right? Their lens has changed. Maybe the privilege is revealed to them, or maybe it is revealed to them that they were living in a marginalized state without realizing it. So strength comes, I guess, in all kinds of ways. Maybe that's the point of that particular tangent, is that strength does come in all kinds of ways, and we do come through this work changed.
I like that. And I think vulnerable is a form of strength. I mean, I think it shows strength to be vulnerable and to to even admit to yourself that I'm being vulnerable right now, and especially sharing it with others. It takes strength to do that. So
it really does. Strength and courage, and for me, I have a strange relationship with the word strength. I grew up Southern. I grew up in a little swamp town in Florida, and we have very interesting associations with our assignments of gender and roles, and so strength for me, sort of like happiness, right? Happiness and these aren't necessarily goals for me. Balance and happiness and strength, they feel like punctuations which we can aspire towards, but then and they're reference points, but then we move into other states like vulnerable. maybe perhaps instead of strong. And maybe perhaps we move from balanced to harmonious, that sometimes there's more one thing than the next. And maybe, instead of happiness, we move into peace. There's a peacefulness instead of a happiness. We can't sustain these certain qualities, just like anger. We can't sustain anger. Sometimes we can't sustain love, but we can always sustain compassion. Right? So these are, I think, gifts of the practice of magic. I think this is what it does for us. And that, I think, maybe perhaps going back to our initial or some of our earlier questions and conversations, I think perhaps this is why folks might stay in the trend. They might stay in the superficial, because once they start to penetrate deeper into their craft, their magic, they start to have these foundations cracked and challenged. And it doesn't always look or sound or feel like the way they thought it would. And it's really intimidating.
Yeah. That's one of the hardest parts of spirituality and magic. It doesn't have one look. It doesn't look one certain way. And it's not all, high vibe, glitz and glamour, beautiful. Magic and spirituality, it can be painful and hard as hell and ugly and really tough.
And necessarily so sometimes also. Necessarily.
Yes.
Vulgar.
But it's so worth it. And we need to go to those deeper levels as human beings. Otherwise, kind of what's the point of life if we're just going to live on the superficial and put blinders on and, it's kind of what's the point of living? What are you here for if you're not going to dig deep and really go to all the layers, the good and the bad?
One of the things I say to students and clients is that if it's happening already, why not be honest about it, right? If you're sad, all right, be sad. Be with that. And if you are numb, okay, be numb, but be with that. What is that? Where does that come from? How did that happen? What is needed and necessary? If you're messy, you're messy. If you're organized, you're organized. One of the things I taught a class yesterday on the sacred rituals of tending to death and dying, and one of the things we were talking about, and it's something I talk about in a lot of the classes with my students and also in sessions with clients, is that if there is something that we're discussing or that I'm offering insight around that isn't registering or resonating or doesn't feel right, that's awesome. It doesn't have to. You don't have to agree. But what I'm curious about is, what is it that you don't agree with? And what would you agree with more? Right? So if it's not this perspective, this is a topic we're needing to discuss. And if this isn't how you look at it, it's still a real thing to observe. What would be the more appropriate way for you? And the same, if you agree with something or you feel resonant with something, that doesn't mean you just walk away with it. You bring it in and you explore that and you ask yourself a question around it. What is the relationship there?
I love it. I love all of this. You are very good with words. I could just listen to you talk forever. I'm like, oh, keep talking.
Oh, well, I could. I
like it though, because it's not like awkward silence.
Love it.
Yeah, I need you to teach me words, because I feel like I'm not always the best with words. Well, let's see. I want to look at my questions really quick. I did want to touch on nature and the importance of connecting to nature, and the element that nature brings to spirituality. If you want to touch on that topic at all.
Yeah, it's a big one.
Yeah.
They've all been big ones. I'm grabbing my clock. Hang on a second. I'll say it this way. I believe that magic is part of us. Um, Magic is the world. Magic is the elements. It's it's cause. It's effect. It's our reactions. It's our impulse. It's our instinct. We're animals, and I think we forget that sometimes. And I think that we have over time synthesized a reality in the world. I'm looking at these buildings across the street. I'm in the building that I'm in, and we synthesized our experience of nature to bring about maybe more comfort or more access to information or to explore different potential within us. And it has also become a life of its own. Our contemporary world is now, like it or not, it's natural. It's our new normal. It's our new nature. These buildings are they've come from resources here that maybe we've synthesized or maybe we've just transmuted. So in that, I think that our contemporary lives, for the most part, the majority of, I think, Western culture, our Western culture has created a veil or a belief or a separation between us and the natural world. One of the things I teach is to begin to find connection to nature through the environment that my students live in.
Mm-hmm.
Walk down the street and look at the trees. Be in your home and understand that, when I look up in my office, the ceiling is made of wood beams, and I look at those wood beams and I think you are an old being here, right? You came from beautiful trees, and I think about that. And there are ways to connect to nature and to remember. And I think sometimes for us, remembering is difficult, particularly when we lace remembering with shame or judgment. I think a lot of us, I'll say it this way, I often struggle with the shame of being in a contemporary life. That maybe comes from remembering to what nature feels like. I don't know. I'm kind of going off on something, but magic is of nature, and we can access nature through a relationship with magic, through the elements, through earth and air, fire and water. We can access nature through a walk down the street, breathing in the air, looking at the sky, remembering our animal self. It's vital for us to connect to nature in whatever way we can, because it plugs us back into source, and it plugs us back into a limitlessness that I think we can't understand, but it's still essential for us to be relating to, like be in relationship with. I don't think you necessarily need to like go camping or hiking if it's not your thing, but there is something very healing about being in those environments too. So I don't think you necessarily need to like move to the country to be a witch. But if you do live in the city, I don't know, go hug a tree once a day, not at least. It helps us to remember the fact that we are animals, and I think it puts a lot of our contemporary circumstances in perspective, not as a way of denying or diminishing them, but also as a way of, like, I think, pulling back our perspective. Witches have a tendency to live on the fringe historically, and I think even now. And another way of looking at that is that we live in between. We live in between the seen and the unseen. We live in.
The internet does not like us today.
Oh no.
I heard we live in between the seen and the unseen, and then you froze.
The limitless, unseen, and unmade potential, and the creation of something. Like, we're always in between stuff. And I think if we don't take time to remove ourselves from our established life and processes, that we forget that there's something else happening. And so I think it's important for us to disconnect from our contemporary life, identify ourselves as animal, access nature, and then come back to our world so we can have a different perspective. We get mired by the rigmarole, like the mendacity becomes more important than it is. And it's necessary, it's essential, and there's a lot in the mundane world that is crucial, but I don't think, I don't think that the need to be fighting militarized police states is a mundane thing. I think that that is an extraordinarily active and vital circumstance. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about emails. I'm talking about Instagram. I'm talking about even our experience. It's important to disconnect from that so that we can have a more honest perspective. Otherwise, all of our magic will be channeled through a limited scope.
I love that you bring up, you don't have to be out in the middle of the woods with like nothing, no tent, nothing, out in the wilderness to really connect to nature and have that, connection that you can literally, it doesn't matter where you are, you can walk outside and look at the sky and there's nature. Like there's your connection to spirit, to nature, to everything. That you can even find beauty. Huh?
Make some good food, like eat something, like go like consensually get fucked by your partner, like go make love, snuggle your animal, like whatever you need, like that. Be an animal. Be an animal.
I love that.
Fart in public and blame it on somebody else. Like break down crying in the gas station. I don't know. Like be an animal. Yeah.
But you don't necessarily need to be out in the wild to tap into that wild within you.
Right. We are nature.
Yeah. I mean,
we're nature. We are natural.
So pretty much wherever we are, we're with nature.
Right. So I think that's our role. It's our job. It's our responsibility. I think talking about responsibility, that is part of it.
Yeah. I love that.
Cool.
Alrighty. Well, we're going to run out of time here in a minute. So before we close.
Goodbyes. Maybe we can say our goodbyes.
Yeah. Was there anything that you wanted to add or anything that you feel that needs to be shared before we?
I think the only thing that I would add is just if you're called to magic, if for this is also for your audience, but if you're called to magic, if it's waking up inside of you, listen to that, follow that. If it takes you to traditions not your own, then you seek out somebody who gives permission for you to access that. But follow the calling. Find a teacher, find a community. There are resources. You could always plug into the Cunning Apothecary. If we don't have what is needed, then we have a really beautiful connection with different communities. There's never one way to do something. There's never one person who is the person to be in relationship with in regards to the craft, in regards to your healing. And at the same time, commit yourself to your magic. And if you are called to something or some place, stay there a while and understand yourself, understand your relationship with that place, understand your magic through that relationship, and then move on if you need to. But I think the gist of it is, listen to yourself, and then find resources to help you make sense of what you've heard.
I love that. Thank you. And then do you want to share how people can work with you, whether online or locally as well?
Absolutely. So I do Skype sessions and phone sessions. You can access my personal work through traditionalmagic.com, all one word, lowercase letters. You can have a good time reading through the website. I talk a lot about the healing craft and the different classes I offer. I'm currently cultivating an online curriculum that do not know when that's going to be launched, but I do travel and teach. So you can look through the class listings and the workshops that I offer. And if you're interested, you could bring me up and we can schedule something. You can sponsor a workshop anywhere.
Awesome.
And that's kind of cool. It's something I love to do. And then the Cunning Apothecary is the store that where we sell all of our tinctures and ceremonial supplies, and you can access that through the website cunningcrowapothecary.com or on Instagram. We are currently unable to take online orders as a result of some very interesting discriminatory practices within the banking industries for metaphysical and herbal apothecaries. It's a weird conversation, but so if you look through the catalog online, you could always call and we can ship you out things and take the old-fashioned way over the phone.
All right, awesome. Yeah. And then traditional magic, was that CK or just a C?
Traditional magic with just a C. So okay. Traditional and then magic.
Okay. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for helping us and sharing your beautiful words that I could listen to all day long.
Well, now you can.
I'm just going to play this podcast over and over.
A ball with you. Thank you so much for inviting me on.
Yay, anytime. All right, have a good day, evening, morning, whatever it is for you.
Still on the West Coast here, it's morning, so.
Afternoon here, so.
Well, have a good afternoon. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.